Welcome to the Vidi podcast. Katie Allen, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, it's exciting to be out of the house.
Your first trip on the tube.
I've just run the tube for, I don't know, months, weeks at least.
How did it feel?
Very empty, so it felt nice and safe. Kept my gloves on, my mask on.
You're glaring at anyone who didn't have their mask on.
No,
properly.
I feel like things have improved. I think like more people are wearing masks now.
A bit more
I don't know.
etiquette.
Yeah, no, it was a very exciting experience. Yeah. So thank you for getting me out.
The adrenaline is finally ebbing away. You're sitting safely here in Bounds Green.
Yeah, that's it. Now, yeah.
Congratulations on the book deal.
Thank you very much. Thanks. It's
Go on,
exciting.
tell us the elation. Was it a real kind of beautiful moment of finally things coming to fruition?
So I had to actually physically sit down. That's a bit of a cliche, but so I'd sent my book before I got an agent. I actually sent it to a publisher that I'd met just randomly who lives near me. And she'd said to me, "Oh, send me your book." And I said, "Oh no, you're just being polite. Like, don't say that. You must get hundreds of books a month." And she was like, "No, send it." And I went home, and then a couple of days later, I thought, you'd be an absolute idiot not to send your book to a publisher who's just asked for it. So I sent it to her, and I kind of thought, like now you've got to send the email, and then you've got to put it right out your mind. Don't be like constantly checking your email.
Yeah.
And then one day, I think I was about to go on the school run, check my email, and there's an email from her. And I'm like, "Oh, that's really nice. She's written back." And she did, she acknowledged when I sent it. She said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to reading this, but quite busy." And then like 10 days later, there was this email going, "I absolutely love your book." And it was just like, what? I'm trying not to swear. And I was just like, no, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I found it really hard to believe. So I sort of sat down on the stairs where I was and kind of just like felt really sick and read it again. Because I think, like, I know like we chuck out, you draft and you redraft until you think you've got it as good as you can. But in the back of my mind, it's still like, it's probably not good enough. And for her, it just really touched something. And yeah, so the email was absolutely lovely. And like whenever I feel really down, I look at that email. So if my confidence, because I'm trying to write another one, and if my confidence goes, I just look at that email and like, maybe you can do something that some people like. I'm not saying like you can do something that everyone likes, because I think that's probably impossible. But that was the first indication that like, oh God, something could happen. And then her email ended with like, "I want to publish this." And I was like, bloody hell, she's not just... So I was like, initially I was like, because she met me, she's just being... this up. She's being polite, But...
So when's it coming out? And who's publishing it?
So it's a indie publisher called Orenda Books. And it comes out as an ebook in April, and then as a book on the 10th of June next year. And you can pre-order it on Amazon, but other bookshops are available. Which is really weird to like go on a website and find your book there.
Yeah.
But if you put my name into Amazon, you'll get another writer called Katie Allen as well as mine, and they're a very different kind of book.
Oh,
so
really?
I dare you to do
Go
that.
on, who's the other Katie Allen?
She's written
Tell
things.
me she's writing
like
romance.
Yeah, of course she is. Yeah. So
Saucy stuff.
all the men on the covers are naked. No, sorry, God, I didn't mean naked. I meant half naked.
Yeah.
Sorry, they're half naked. So they're things like baking lessons and English lessons.
Baking lessons
and so
with
on.
extra nuts.
Yeah. That's prime. Yeah. So never mind. It's not even her real name, but never mind. It's fine. It's maybe it'll help me.
So do you want to read the opening to your novel? It's still got the same title, right?
Yes, it's got the same title. It's called Everything Happens for a Reason, which is not my motto. It's just the title of the book.
Yeah.
And it's something someone says to my character, but we'll get to that extra later.
Take it away.
So this is the very opening, and the book is written as emails. So it starts to LRS 17. Friday, 17th of February, 9:15 a.m. Subject, what now? I know what's going to happen. You see it too. I'm colouring in too hard. Over and over the same patch, and the paper's falling apart. I go round and round that day, the night and the morning. I reach the end, go back to the start, do it 4 times, 5 more. It takes hours and sometimes minutes. Depends what you include. I take different starting points. Here, the taxi, the room, but I always go to the end. Sometimes a detail emerges, like that toddler pressing all the buttons in the lift and how we went down before we went up. It doesn't help. I can't make myself believe it. I don't want to believe it. It doesn't make sense. They get that too. Everyone. Well, not everyone. Most of them. They call, I don't pick up. They text to say how bad they feel for me, how sorry, how awful it must be. You know, telling me what I should feel, but at the same time careful to say they can't imagine how I feel. All that energy poured into imagining something that they don't want to be able to imagine, or don't want to tell me they can imagine, or at least they imagine I don't want them to imagine, or to imagine them imagining. See? I'm going fucking mad here. Sorry, inappropriate. Hang on, door's about to go. Van stopping on double yellows. It'll be for me. To LRS 17, Monday, 20th of February, 1838. Subject, invasion. Sorry, gone longer than I meant. If you're reading these, you'll be wondering what I've been up to. I have that effect on people. Will from Continuity called last week, asks, what do you do all day? I told him laundry, which is true. No one tells you how helpful sadness is for staying on top of housework. I have a system. Socks in one load, hang them in pairs. T-shirts in another, iron while damp. It's bad for the polar bears, but they'd understand. 2 hours too late, I came up with a better line for Will. I'll have it to hand next time. All those little jobs I've been meaning to do for years. If pressed, I'll say, gutters, the loft, sorting photos. They'll know I'm busy and productive, and everyone will be happy. But because it's you, I can tell you, I haven't started on the gutters, too wet. The loft is not something I can do on my own, and the photos would set me back months. There are 10,543, and each photo costs me an average of 4 minutes preoccupation. That row about the driver, never again dungarees. Did we know that's the happiest we'd ever be? What do I do? The last few days have just gone, but I can't say what with, apart from a socks and pants cycle. I can tell you how it started though, with an invasion. I was right, the florist van was for me. Jean and Tim, my mother's friends, you don't know them. I was still behind the front door, picking out bits of rosemary added by some hipster florist, when the letterbox clattered open. He's a light-footed creep, that postman. To be fair, the post's helpful. It gives the day shape. Washing machine on, coffee, post, empty machine, hang, iron. Routine's important. If you were into that kind of thing, you could use the post to measure how much time has passed. At the start, it was almost all cards. Now, nearly 3 weeks on, 2 weeks and 5 days, the cards are thinning out. We're back to bills and bank statements. Except today. Along with an insurance renewal for Leicester and something from the tax person, there was a card. That's what it looked like, at least. I won't bore you with what a Trojan horse is, but that's what it was. Innocuous magnolia envelope, murderous contents. I pieced together the Bristol postmark and the handwriting, biro, bulges on the A's, B's and D's like an elephant had sat on them. Liz. Liz is on the you've left it far too long list, along with cousin Jules, 2 women in outreach, and Vic from primary school. I'm not unreasonable. I know some people were on holiday or out of stamps. Some late arrivals managed to make it off the left it far too long list. But the deadline's passed for the rest. Each day they stayed silent. They made you smaller. I stare at Liz's magnolia-clad appeal for clemency lying on the table. The kitchen table. I stopped to make coffee. I should have known. Why expect maturity for someone who dots her I's with a daisy? You can tell I'm stalling. I might as well tell you. Explains the 3-day silence. And like I said, no one likes a long silence. I tear the envelope. Easily, it's cheap paper. Inside is a single postcard. And this is the stupid bit. I pull it out without thinking. I drop it. It lands face up on the table. And it's too late to look away. Its glassy little eyes stare up at me. Who the fuck sends a picture of a newborn baby to a grieving mother?
Oh, brilliant.
What struck me about that is, it's such a serious topic in some ways, like, stillborn child, loss. But it's the way you've kind of like created the voice,
The first person narrator. It's so like undercut with like a sarcastic humour that it kind of, I don't know, it's like it's got a gallows humor in some kind of ways, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think
it's
it's
hard to create that kind of balance between like dark subject, not dark subject matter, like, you know, something that is quite sensitive, but then like maintaining kind of the reality of a kind of narrative voice that's kind of like irreverent almost.
Yeah, I think the thing, there was no, like, I wouldn't say I ever put any effort into making it funny. I think the real effort in the editing process went into stopping, because I quite like funny. And I think sometimes I had to remind myself, even though stillbirth is something that happened to me, I had to remind myself, God, this woman has really recently just lost her baby, and you're going to have to, so I had to tone down some of the humour or some of the silliness at times where it just felt like, do you know what, this wouldn't be a joking matter at this point. But I don't think anything is not a joking matter. I think everything is open to humour, and I think a lot of people cope by using humour when sad stuff happens, and I count myself among that. So I guess the thing I worried about when writing it, and the idea of it being published, is I never want her to sound flippant. But I hope I've tried to mix some really sad moments with her general approach to life. And I would say this about anybody who's lost someone, is you're still the same person before and after. It changes you, but you're still the same. You know, like I was sarcastic before our baby died, and I was sarcastic afterwards. Yeah. So I think she's just like that.
Yeah, that's to the realism, doesn't it? Because things are never just one thing, you know.
Yeah.
Like you said, even when things are sad, there's kind of like, there can be humour and light in kind of things that are quite dark, which is kind of, do you think that helps people connect to that kind of, do you mean it actually adds to the realism, and you go, yeah, actually that is how it really is?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are moments when people are just desperately sad and you're crying and everything seems absolutely rubbish. But I do think that in the space of each day, there's probably something funny happens. And I think that is the way she sees the world. And she can be quite cynical and quite sarcastic. So it's not always like, yes, the effect might be funny, but it comes from a place of kind of anger and bitterness that's not always that likable, I'd say. You know, she's really mad at this woman for sending this card when this woman might not even know that she's lost her baby. I think she does. And it's that... Yeah, so her way of seeing the world is very much focused on what's just happened to her, which, to be fair, is the way we all live, right? Like, we're all egocentric in the end. Yeah. So I wanted to explore that a bit as well. It's like my view of my world is this, but someone else's view of their world is that, and they don't actually think about you that much, you know.
Well, she's sending you the card with it, which is kind of like, shows how wrapped up people are in their own kind of everyday experience,
especially when they've just had a baby, you know. And Rachel, my character, is like that, especially when she just had a dead baby, sorry to put it so bluntly, is wrapped up in that just the same way as people who've just had babies can get quite wrapped up. You know, when you meet a friend who's just had a baby, and like, there's always that sort of joke about all they talk about is nappies and buggies, and you know, the baby smiled yesterday. So it's kind of that, but in this case, the baby's different. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting as well, the way you've centered it in the domestic right at the start. You know, she's doing quite mundane things, like you know, she's talking about like doing the laundry and the socks and kind of talking to people. Like she's not, and then it's like this kind of, it's almost like gothic in terms of this intrusion of the, you know, of the darkness into the kind of, you know, there's something going on. You know, the way she's talking about the people being on her list or whatever. Yeah. And then, you know, when you use that Trojan horse kind of metaphor going on there, it's like, you know, it's like the misery is kind of coming in to invade the house. Did you have to think about multiple kind of ways of opening the book, or was it always kind of like, I'm going to have her just kind of like pottering and then I'm going to hit them with the big reveal?
So that is the original opening. But it didn't. But it wasn't. But hang on. But it wasn't for ages. So it was the original opening. Like when I first. So this kind of came to me. I was too early for a press conference when I was working as a journalist, and it was in St James's Park, and I think it must have been summer. So I went and sat on a bench. And I was like, I just had this character, and she was sitting at a window in the house we used to live in, which is not the house in the thing. And I could just see her at this desk, and I was like, if she just lost this baby, what would she do? Now this is a massive spoiler. She would write to the baby, and I think you're going to work out that the emails are to the baby. And I could see her, and I could see her typing, and I think there was a bit that I'd written where she's talking to him about writing emails. But then I was just like, do you know what the big thing is going to be? Is that you're going to, like, the surprise will be, and it's not many words in, that she's just been sent this card, and that's where she reveals she's a grieving mother. Obviously, in the reality of books, anyone who's read the blurb knows. So that's the weird thing, isn't it? You really can't have that many giant surprises about the central thing that happens at the beginning, and, you know, never mind.
Because that's how they're going to market your bloody book.
Yeah. So there's sadly, because there are blurbs, people know. They don't know immediately who the emails are to, but they do know she's a grieving mother. So that just came to me, and then I wrote that. And then there were loads of iterations where I wrote emails about writing emails. So she was like, "Oh, I don't know if I should write to you. Should I write to you?" And then there was another one where she goes and doesn't buy orange juice because she drank orange juice the whole pregnancy because she thought she needed it.
Yeah.
And then she was going to prove to herself that she was getting better by not buying orange juice. So there's this whole, like, Sainsbury's scene where she doesn't buy orange juice and she keeps going to put it back because, anyway, it's like this convoluted scene. So that existed for a while, and then eventually I went right back to this baby card.
It's fascinating, isn't it? There's, like, sometimes this, like, the subconscious knows.
Yeah, how to
like,
tell
as
a
a
story.
writer, you have a sense of kind of where this should start, and sometimes maybe the first idea is the best idea. I don't know. Do you know what? The more I read it, though, and, like, you know, I'm gonna have to read it again next year and things when it comes out. Like, I think you get quite cross with your own stuff, don't you? I saw someone say the other day, like, someone was asking for advice on Twitter to other writers, how do you do your edits with your editor when they come back to you? And someone else wrote back, a guy called Will Carver, who's with the same publisher, he wrote back, well, to me, once a book's, like, with the editor, it's dead to me, so just get it over done with quickly and get on with your next book. And I think there's something in that like, after a while, you know, you just got to detach yourself. Put your emotional stuff in, and now it's the technical kind of.
Otherwise, you could tinker forever, and I get cross with it, and I was just like, no, do you know what? Now it's finished. It's on the page. You can't prattle about with it. So
just to go back to the epistolatory thing, using the emails. Where did the inspiration from that come from? Because that's quite it's quite old school in some ways. You know, it's kind of like Victorian. I think epistolary. I think the Brontes and maybe like Bram Stoker's Dracula, and, you know,
Dangerous Liaisons is another one.
It's kind of like, oh, Dr. Featherweather came today. So, what made you kind of think, you know, I'm gonna reboot this format?
I don't know if I thought of it. So we lost a baby in childbirth. So he was stillborn 10 years ago, called Finn. And initially, so I remember, and I'm very different from my character because I already had a 2-year-old, and I do think that made a massive difference to my life. I'm not judging how anyone else's life has gone after a baby loss, but in my case, life was pretty busy with the 2-year-old, Alex. And I remember, like, him going back to nursery, or he was at nursery, and my husband took the 2 weeks paternity leave after our baby died, as you have your right to. And he went back to work, and it was the first day when Alex was at nursery, my husband was at work, and that would have been our first day, baby and me at home, and he wasn't there. And that was, like, for me, a really, really hard day. And so I sat down and got a book out, a notebook, and started writing to him, sort of telling him what we'd be doing, which is, I know it's incredibly sad, sorry. And that's what I thought this character would do, because basically she's got this year of maternity leave. She's, like, quite middle class, and she's got a job where you get maternity leave and it's paid, so she's, you know, in quite a good position financially. That's what she would do, right? She doesn't know what else to do. She doesn't know who else to talk to, and, you know, the book explores the relationship with the husband a bit as well, in terms of they don't know how to talk to each other about what's happened to them. So yeah, that's where it came from. I think it came from me doing it originally, and at some point, so it was written. So that scene was written in third person for a while, and then it suddenly hit me while we were on our MA in writing. I think we're doing the experiments in style with Claire Allen. I was just like, do you know what? So I'd moved to first person already, and I was like, do you know what? She would tell it to the baby, because that's the one person she wants to be able to talk to that she can't. So, and that was like a massive breakthrough in terms of being able to write the book. Yeah. And on the other hand, it's a real bugger because you have to start each email with, it's difficult. You have to lead into each email with kind of like, this thing happened in the past, obviously, because she needs to physically be able to have the events happen. Yeah. And then go home or sit on a bench with her phone. So she either types them on her phone or on her laptop. So she needs to be able to tell them, but I wanted it to be quite live and close. So she slips into present tense when she's talking to him.
So you create the feel of an email, then drop it, and basically go into the world of the fiction. Yeah, I can see how that could be a challenge, right? Because it can be too reported, too kind of distant, and then you're not going to create the world in any kind of convincing way for the reader.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the problem. So if I'd have done it really sort of as she had done it, and it's fiction, so you're allowed to change it, then it could have been quite boring, I think. Sort of, And she wouldn't have written as in real life. You would never write as many emails as she writes. I think she writes something like 290. yeah. I think there's 290 emails or something. But I had to count them at one point. So.
That's interesting though. This idea of so you've picked a format which is basically mirrors maybe why you're writing the book, or kind of partially what you're getting out of writing the book. If I'm always quite interested in kind of why writers write, even for myself, I don't really know what it is. Sometimes I feel like it's kind of like pouring neuroses, or kind of like things that I'm trying to figure out. Like in my own life, I need to kind of write through it to kind of, it's kind of like meditation, or like counseling myself, if you know what I mean. Is there a sense of that in the kind of the emails, and were there moments where you were kind of, this is bringing up stuff that I don't really want to go back to? Were there times where you're like, this is quite traumatic? Yeah.
So what I've done is I've woven through. So if you were into analysing books, you could probably work out like the number of pages that go by before I weave through what happened the night that the baby died. So it's split into different emails that kind of come up at various points. Those I found really hard because they are based on real life, and I thought, the details of like just the weird medical details, and that I found quite hard, because then I feel like there's part of me, even though it's 10 years ago that our baby died, that still does not believe it happened to me, which, psychotherapists would have a field day with, I'm sure. We did have brilliant therapy after Finn died, provided by King's Hospital, with absolutely brilliant therapist, and again when we were pregnant again. So I feel like I have tried to unpack it with a professional, but every so often I feel like, oh, it didn't happen to me, it happened to someone else. And but when you start writing those things and that those details, then I'm like, shit, I was really there.
This is visceral.
Yeah. So that was hard. I don't know whether, I don't think I set out like, I'm going to write this and it's going to make me better. Because like I say, I've got, at this point, 10 years distance. I think when I started writing it, 7 years distance, and I'd had that therapy. But yeah, I guess really deep down, I guess I just wanted to, it's a very unique, it's not a unique thing at all, but I think it's quite unique in literature. And since the book's kind of been announced, I've had people messaging me saying, oh my God, you wouldn't believe how hard people have been trying to get things about stillbirth published. I had some really heartening messages last week that sort of really emotional from people saying, thank God somebody's broached this. And and there were bigger publishers who said, sorry, we just can't market this topic. And you're just like, if you can't talk about stillbirth in literature, or if you can't talk about issues in literature, where can you talk about them?
Yeah, exactly.
And if we don't talk about them, it doesn't make stillbirth go away. Like, I'm not going to start banging on about this, but
you didn't
babies
invent,
die.
You didn't invent the issue.
I didn't invent it.
You're just writing about something that actually
horribly.
happened.
There are people going through it all the time, and when we don't talk about it, it just makes those people even more sad. The worst thing that they could imagine has already happened. I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world, but the worst thing that they could imagine at that point in their lives, and in my life at that time, has happened. And then to feel you're not allowed to talk about it because you might upset people, which my character goes through a bit, it's just worse. And so that's, Do
you think there's been a kind of sanitization, or like an impulse to kind of sanitize literature overall? Or, I mean...
I don't know, because we have a lot of crime books, don't we? I mean, this is what my agent was saying. It's like, hang on, we're allowed things about, we have murder, we have people murdering their spouse, we have child abuse.
A women's issue. Is this kind of,
I don't know if it's that. So, one thing I think is that we all have this really, really deep primal desire for babies to be safe and babies to be okay. And so I don't think it comes from a bad place when people don't want to talk about stillbirth. It scares the bejesus. Basically we just don't want to believe. And I would count myself among those people. Like before Finn died, someone told me about, someone said to me, I don't have a home birth because I know someone had a home birth and it all went wrong. And I said to her, I remember actually saying these words like, that never happens these days. I actually said those words. So naive, but I was heavily pregnant at the time and I just couldn't go there. And I think that's a really big part of it, is that we just don't, I don't think it's nasty of people. I think we just don't want to confront it. And it's actually quite a biological thing that we have in us to not think about children dying. It's just a horrible thing to think about.
It's kind of so horrific we have to kind of suppress it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. What are you going to read for us next?
So you talked about epistolary novels.
Yeah.
And when I was writing this, I like I said, I had this problem of how do you tell something that feels live but it's told in letters. And so I read about this wonderful book, Michael Frayn's The Trick of It, which is from a while ago, but it's written as letters and it's all one-way letters. So the character is an academic of English literature, and he specialises in this one woman.
The worst kind of people.
They're the worst
English
kind of people.
literature academics.
They have so many problems.
Charlatans.
So
confidence men, that's all they are.
So you need to read this book. You need to read this book and have a good look at yourself.
Too close to the bottom.
So he is an academic who studies the novels of one particular woman. And he's obsessed with this woman, and he knows everything about this woman. He knows more about this woman than she knows about herself.
Yeah.
And he knows her books better than she knows them. And he invites her to an event and she comes. And they end up in bed together. And he's telling all this in letters to a friend who's an academic in Australia. And I'm going to read from the point where they've slept together. She's gone back to where she lives in London. He's I think he's in Norfolk, anyway, somewhere provincial, as he calls it. And he's going to go and surprise her in London. I hate London. I hate all that wealth. I hate the way the money keeps leaking out of the rich bits and seeping into the poor bits like some oozing radioactive effluent and poisoning them. I hate not knowing where the contagion's got to now. I hate people realising I'm just there for the day. I hate other people who are just there for the day. I hate not being sure whether they are or whether they aren't. I hate all those streets that somebody else owned on the Monopoly board. I hate those smug red buses that drop Monopoly names all over the front. I hate the Dickens bits. I hate the Virginia Woolf bits. I hate the weather. All that smart metropolitan hotness. All that savage metropolitan wetness. It was the wetness that got me this time. Blue skies and great rolling white clouds as the train came in from the suburbs. So I checked my umbrella in with my overnight bag and left luggage. I obviously couldn't arrive on her doorstep with the bag, as if I'd come to stay. I had to just be looking in, on my way from somewhere in London to somewhere else. And I obviously didn't want to arrive with an umbrella on my arm, looking like some cautious provincial academic who'd been forced to equip himself for all the day's possibilities hours earlier in some entirely different weather zone, where everyone in London knew there was some up-to-the-minute metropolitan dryness in the air. But when I came out of the tube, that bitch of a city had undergone some amusingly sophisticated change of heart. The sky was bleak, and an ominous wind was groping around inside my jacket and feeling up my trouser leg. And sure enough, by the time I had gone far enough to get lost, it had started to rain. It was one of those bits of London where with any luck you could get mugged by rastas and vomited over by security brokers within the same block. Poor people desperate to look rich were all mixed up with the rich people desperate to be poor, and the strangest anomaly on the streets was undoubtedly an academic desperate to remain an academic, particularly an academic without an umbrella. The rain lost all normal civilised restraint. It hurled itself down on me with terrible impersonal metropolitan violence. My nerve broke. I ran. So that by the time I found the right front door, I was not only soaked but out of breath. She took some moments to recognise me. She stood holding the door open with one hand and holding a mug in the other with a plate balanced on top of it, caught between floors probably, on her way from somewhere to somewhere else. She gazed at me, waiting for me to explain myself. I stood gazing back at her, not explaining myself. Why not, you ask? Because it took me some moments to recognise her. The last time I had seen her fully dressed, the only time, she'd been wearing, I don't know, something kind of dark blue. You know how sensitive I am to colours. Something rather soft with a touch of worldliness at her throat. I also recalled a waist and ankles and neatness in the feet. This is why I'd been taken aback for a moment, as I had got to know her better, to find signs of such charming disarray beneath the surface. But now I was face to face with something in brown. A brown cardigan done up over a maroon dress, over a pair of men's grey trousers, over a pair of furry red slippers that some aunt had given her for Christmas. No worldliness, no neatness, no waist for that matter, no ankles. Just a pair of joke half-moon spectacles sliding down her nose, and a mug of tea with a plate on top of it, and on the plate a slice of bread and Marmite with a tomato next to it. I hated that tomato. It looked to me like a London tomato. It took me some moments to recognise her. That's not so. I knew it was her all right, knew at once from the deep unblinking gaze above the glasses. I was just taken aback for a moment, once again, to find it located in this dreadful bundle of old cast-offs. Or, to be absolutely precise, I should have known at once it was her if I hadn't removed my own spectacles to wipe the rain off them. I put them back and knew her. By which time she knew me. We knew each other. "I was in town," I said. "Yes," she replied. We stood facing each other, waiting for something to happen. A difficult moment at the best of times, in my experience, the second meeting. But this was a tougher test than most. The wet trousers clung piteously around my knees like tearful supplicants. The terrible tomato rolled portentously around her plate like an oversized roulette ball that had still not made up its mind which of the players to favour. I knew what had happened. She'd been working in some upstairs room. She had come downstairs to the kitchen for 5 minutes to get herself something to eat as she worked. And then, before she could get back up the stairs, Porlock. "Well?" she said. "Anyway," I replied. "I believe I told you in an earlier letter how much we had to say to each other. But we could get on equally well, I now discovered, without words. In fact, after this opening conversation, we were happy to stand for an hour or two in absolute silence." Then she moved to one side and gestured silently with the mug of tea for me to enter. The gesture dislodged the tomato, and it fell off the plate and rolled away across the hall. Even before I was properly through the door, I was making haste to help about the house, as a guest should, by bending to retrieve it. She, like a good hostess, rushed to forestall me, so that I caught the mug. The tea went mostly over the wallpaper. The bread and Marmite fell onto the floor. Marmite side down, of course. I hadn't just stopped her working, I had even stopped her eating and drinking. On the other hand, what a wealth of material I was giving her, if ever, many years from now, when all this emotion is recollected in tranquillity, she attempts a comic novel.
Brilliant. Yeah, again, it's the kind of the closeness of the narration. It's so like in that person's world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's hard for that one because it becomes a feature of the book later on. The letters are going to Australia, and the friend is busy. He's having a family, and obviously the letters take, I don't know how long, weeks it feels, and it sort of becomes a plot point that the letters are not getting there because he wants to recall one but he can't. I just
wants
love
to get
that.
one back.
Yeah,
he said something.
He said something you shouldn't. He doesn't want it to be on record. But it's as you say, it's a really, really short book. But it's just absolutely, I think it's absolutely brilliant because you're very much in this man's world and his neuroses, and he starts to have conversations with his recipient. Where he said something. I think I believe I said last time how much we have to say to each other. So there's little bits like that.
Yeah.
But what I love about that scene is for anyone who's ever spent time writing at home alone when it's cold, is you're quite likely to be dressed in brown with a cardigan up to here, and I look an absolute mess when I'm writing, and I just think it's so hilarious that there's this woman he idolises, but he's caught her while she's got her toast and Marmite and her brown
and the
cardigan.
Tomato kind of rolling around. I love that image.
The London
it's like
tomato.
a roulette. Yeah. He's got such antagonism towards London.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone feels like that about London a little bit sometimes, don't they?
I think so. And he does. Because basically the whole book, it's called The Trick of It, because he just can't. He wants to be a novelist, and he can't quite capture the trick of what it is that makes her. And I think London for him represents that kind of out of reach world. Of,
the metropolitan elite, and he's kind of he's feeling parochial.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So yeah, it's just a brilliant character that he's built, and yeah.
Again, it's that sarcasm, isn't it? And kind of irascible, kind of being a bit snarky and kind of going through life with these kind of sarcastic put downs almost for everything.
Yeah, he does, but he's also quite like, you sort of feel sorry for him as well, which I think works quite well. He's quite like, he's lost. And
have you read a Confederacy of Dunces?
I haven't. I've only read bits of it.
Similar kind of that, anti-hero. You kind of really enjoy the way he kind of is totally convinced that he can see what's wrong with the world, kind of. You know what I mean? He like, that all stuff about he hates the weather and he hates the fucking breakfast and he hates the streets and he hates that everyone can tell that he's not from there.
Yeah.
How does it go? Is it like, does it turn into kind of like a murdery type of thing? Because
no, I don't want to spoil. No, I don't want to spoil anything, but he does end up with the woman, and he shouldn't. And he's just desperate to write his own book while they're together, and she just becomes more and more prolific, but she also locks herself away to write the whole time. He makes her move to the countryside. She's miserable. There's an awful lot packed into it, and like I say, it's all these one-way letters, which I just find really interesting. So,
lots of people moving out of London these days. We're just talking about just helped some people move to Margate the other day.
Yeah, I think like the pandemic's done that, hasn't it, for those who can work from home. And it depends on your job, doesn't it? And it depends on where your kids are at school and what they want to do. But I think, it's good to... I sometimes feel with London, like, I'm going to bash London now. It's like, why would you live somewhere where things are so expensive? So I grew up in the Midlands, and whenever, like, anyone I know from there sort of looks at house prices here and house prices there, like, in terms of the space you can have, it's...
I think in this lockdown, and it's like you can't do all the things London's amazing at, like gigs, theatre.
Yeah.
Then you're kind of like, I'm stuck in my little apartment.
Why am I here?
I haven't got a
not even
garden
going to
or whatever.
work. Yeah.
Then I guess it gets harder. But I've always loved being in the thick of things. I love like that. Even if I don't do it as much as I used to, the fact that I could go out for 2 days.
Yeah.
And see the best things that the world has to offer in terms of kind of music and theatre and galleries and
all those things that you used to have to travel miles to. We'd do a Christmas trip with school where we'd go to Harrods and look around, and then we go to a musical like Cats, and then we get the coach back again. So for me now, if I go to like Knightsbridge now and look at the lights at Christmas, that's like it's still exciting. It's still exciting to go to anywhere with Christmas lights in London.
But for him, that line is quite telling, isn't it? I hate the Dickens bit. I hate the Virginia Woolf bit. It's like he feels oppressed by all the great work that's happened here that he can't. He feels he can't.
He's just massively inadequate. He feels he's inadequate. Like, it's basically somebody having a massive crisis of self-esteem. The entire book. Isn't
that just being a writer in general?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Is it being an academic? I'm not an academic, but yeah.
Maybe that's worse.
She doesn't. So the novelist partner, she doesn't seem to suffer from it, but we rarely get her perspective. It's quite funny how little of her perspective we get. She remains, even when they're together, this sort of literary icon to him. So.
Cool. What are you going to read next?
From
one of your own, I'm guessing.
One of my own, okay. So this is further on in the book. It's still not long since Rachel's baby Luke has died, and her mother has decided to drag her to this prayer night. Rachel doesn't want to go, but she's got nothing else to do, and her mother's like joined this prayer group after her husband, Rachel's dad, has left again, had another affair, and so Rachel's kind of just nosy to see who these people are that her mum keeps talking about, more so than about her own family. So they're people called Emma and Graham who run this group, and they're kind of these like young, attractive, right-on Christians. So we're going to join her partway through this email, and this is where the phrase which gives the title of the book, "Everything happens for a reason," is first dropped on Rachel. So we're going to start partway through an email that is Wednesday 22nd of February, 10:46 a.m, so it's the next morning after prayer night. Subject line: prayer night, or some people are always waiting to pounce. On the tube home, he's safe now when all in God's plan play on a loop in my head. Trust the sodding God phrases to be all powerful. I'm sorry, says the man next to me, older, tweed hat. Ignore me, I say. And he does. There's nothing unusual about chanting all in God's plan on the Northern Line. The train stops, and I realise my second mistake of the night, going via Oval. Of course, our driver chooses to linger there, and while he's going nowhere, I'm dragged 9 months backwards, to the day I saved him. The same day it all started, depending on your view of things. I was on my way to lunch with E. I know it's not the most hygienic of things to admit to, but I had the test with me, in my handbag. Every time I looked in, the 2 little stripes were a deeper pink. Like GCSE, A-level and uni results rolled into one, we'd aced it. You'd have my blonde hair, his blue eyes, but you wouldn't need glasses. His height, my patience, his confidence. I knew you were a boy. I have a cycle like a panda. We'd done the April test too early, tried another one in May. This time we'd promised each other we'd wait. But I knew that was the day to do it. I could always buy another test if it was too soon. I had this plan to hide it under his napkin at the restaurant, surprise him. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd taken the bank train by mistake, realised in time, got off at Oval to wait for the next Charing Cross one. He was at the end of the platform, pacing in squeaky trainers. You've heard the story 100 times since. It's one of my best. People ask me to tell it at dinner parties and in the office. They won't do that with our story. But what I really remember is a jumble, pieces missing. It lasted 2 minutes, 3 at most. He steps on the yellow line, back, over the line, back, to the edge, back. His coat flaps, the kind that catches indoors, wrong for the weather. He's touching his face, mumbling. No one else has seen him, or at least that's what they pretend. Train lights on the wall, the sound, the shaking, he's about to go. I throw my arms around him, fall back. I cushion our landing, but his elbow smacks into the ground and he shouts something like no or ow. It's his only sound. He's shivering. So am I. My arms around him. He smells of sweat and something wet. Mud? I loosen my arms as he sits up. His one hand clasps the bad elbow. The other hand covers his face. And whatever it looked like a minute ago is gone from my mind. A man asks, "You all right, love?" The doors close and the train leaves, without me and with him still here. And there I am, at Oval again, and God's plan is chanting itself hoarse in my head. When I surface at Clapham Common, I have a voicemail from Grandma, for whom God's plan has yet to include learning to text. It begins with the usual admonishments. "Storming out? Those are my friends," she says. "He was my baby," I say over her message. Her voice slows. I'm Pebble again, and she asks if I'll give the group another try. Francis is howling in the background, a cry of solidarity for his human sibling. She shushes him and rambles on at me. "And think about what Emma said. God's plan for you." I didn't listen to the rest. I called back. "All planned. This taken away from me." That got her. "All I'm saying, Pebble," she pauses, "all Emma and Graham are saying is everything happens for a reason."
Very nice.
So.
I actually remember reading an early draft of that, I think, in as part of the NA when we were workshopping stuff.
You poor thing.
Yeah, no. So obviously the book is based on kind of real events, but is that based on any kind of real thing? And if not, where did the inspiration come for, the tube jumper guy?
So I have not ever stopped anyone from jumping in front of a train. That was a radio program on Radio 4 so many years ago. I don't even know. And it was people sort of telling real life things that had happened to them. And it was people who'd saved lives. And there was someone who was on who'd saved someone from jumping in front of a train. And as happens with Rachel, was kind of then shoved out. People then descend, right? It's sort of paramedics are called if needed, and the tube staff take over. And I think police maybe. Anyway, she gets shoved out of the way, the same as this person, and you sort of go off into the world. And it's weird because since I've been writing this, or since when I was writing it, I mentioned it to a couple of friends. And one woman said to me, "Oh, that happened to me." She said, "I was waiting for the tube, really, really busy, near the front of the platform, ready to get on. She was one side of a man, another man was the other side, and this person looked basically like they were about to step out. They could see it in his face, and without talking to each other, she and the person on the other side both put their arms in front and stopped them. And it's like they both knew, and they stopped them. And then everyone got on the train and didn't talk about it, like the same, including the person who was going to jump. And she says, you go, and then she went off, and then every so often this person comes back into her mind of like, did they try again? What did they do? And I sort of like, so that was after I'd started writing, but I'd always had this like thing in my head ever since hearing that radio program of like, what would it be like if you'd saved someone's life and you never saw them again? How much would you wonder about whether,
what
and Rachel's quite, she's a little bit middle class and patronising, and I think she wonders, she just likes to think that he's done something good with his life.
And it's kind of parallels. It's kind of about loss, like, the stillbirth thing's about loss, isn't it? Like lost potential
and loss of purpose, I think. So that's exactly the conclusion she comes to. So she has this phrase dropped on her, everything happens for a reason, and which was something that was said to me as well. And she just goes round and round with it. And I think you can probably guess what's coming soon if she makes the connection between having saved that man's life the actual day that she had the positive pregnancy test and her baby then dying, that those lives basically swap places. That, I mean, it's all a bit cosmic and it's all a bit silly. That like if she hadn't, wheel. She'll do, at this point, she'll do anything to believe that it could have been different, that her baby could have lived. And at this point, she's still waiting for the post-mortem on the baby. And so she basically, just tells herself, I saved him, he got to live, you didn't get to live, as she says in the emails to him. So I guess you can guess what's coming next. And again, it's in the blurb. She then sets out to find the person she saved. And to make his life matter, which is very controlling and not very nice. But she's a book character, so she's allowed to be.
Exactly, because it's entertaining.
But I didn't do that bit. I just want to make that really clear. I did not go and track down some man. Don't tell them what you did or don't do. Keep the mystery going. Yes, I did not.
You have to build a legend around
poor
yourself.
Guy
going around saving lives on the tube. No, but what's interesting there is kind of like. How far do you think humans need to tell themselves stories for that, in those kind of moments, to make sense of things? It's like we need to kind of rearrange our reality to kind of take into account this new thing that's happened to us, and we almost need to tell ourselves a story to make sense of it, even if it's...
I think we do, I think... Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I think we really... That phrase, everything happens for a reason, the reason it preoccupied me when it was said to me, when a sensible person, just like Rachel's husband, just laughs it off. It's like, and he actually says to her, he says, it's bollocks, that's what it is. Just ignore it, move on, which is what my husband would have said to me. But I became preoccupied with it because I think ultimately we want there to be a reason. Because as she says, I've got it here, she said, let's say for a minute they were right. When it comes to you, to us, it would be worse if there were no reason. And I think that's the thing, is like, maybe if she can make it all part of some mathematical equation, it'll be okay. Because when someone dies suddenly, I think the really frightening thing, apart from the loss that follows, but the frightening thing is the lack of control. Find and as a parent, a lack of control is terrifying, isn't it? And we all go through it, when you're like, my big one now gets the tube to school, and I've got over it now, but it's that lack of control and letting go and not being able to protect them all the time. So I think it's
also not being able to protect yourself, right? Because if life is so tenuous, you know what I mean, like if it can be just like that
is frightening, isn't it?
It's very kind of like, hang on, I've been living my normal life kind of not thinking about death as a daily kind of, even if it's kind of underneath the surface of our daily kind of life, we can't deal with it every day.
No,
and next of all, it's like the fabric of the way you think about the world has suddenly got a big hole in it.
And I think it's that replaying thing she does, when we at the beginning, where she says she replays the whole thing in her head the whole time. She wants to know, what happened. It's like that, if I could replay it, and then if I just changed one detail and made it all okay again. Or if I could it's just that kind of I can't get a grip on what happened that night with a sudden death. And I think it's like you say, it's quite frightening, not just for that baby, but for all of us, it's like, you know, if you hear about a friend who's hurt or killed in a crash, like, it's really selfish, but we all think probably that could have been me, don't we? And yeah, I think there's that need to, that's why that phrase is just so enticing.
Yeah, I just, you know, another thing that struck me is kind of like people in these kind of crisis moments, other people are kind of more awkward about dealing with it than maybe even you are. And people fall back on kind of platitudes as a kind of like, oh, I need a schema for how I'm going to deal with this because I can't, you know, I don't want to make the person feel worse. So I'm not going to like, you're kind of awkward in their questioning, or worse, I'm just going to kind of ignore it. And like,
I think it's really hard, isn't it, to know what to say. I think saying everything happens for a reason is not a good thing to say. I just want to put that on record. Because like, I just think saying that after a loss is a really quite mean thing to say. But you know, it's all right because I've got an entire book out of it now, so that's good.
3-book deal. Thanks to that person.
Thank you.
Keep the platitudes coming. You fucking paying for my mortgage.
Yeah. So my character Rachel, she has this thing she calls phrasal retentiveness that really kicks in big time after the loss, after the baby dies. So that's why I should have said before that extract, when she says God's plan and you know, different things that she's heard at that prayer night, they're just like basically being added to that phrase bank that she's got in her head that taunts her at night. And I think that's the thing, is when you go through something traumatic, is everything gets analysed so much more. That's why our memories of traumatic events, I think, are quite clear. So that sort of, again, was quite helpful for writing those scenes. It's like everything slows down and
the adrenaline is
and everything gets overanalyzed. So those poor sods who are sending you cards, you're like analysing every word they've said when all they were trying to do was say the right thing or say anything at all. And she's sort of sitting there reading every single word over and over and going, well, what do they mean by that? Do they mean it was my fault? And she's really blaming herself at this point as well. So she's looking for any evidence of anyone else blaming her to sort of feed into that narrative. So she has, this obsession with phrases. And I think it is really hard to say the right thing when someone's lost someone.
Right thing, is there?
It's not the right thing, because what you really want to be able to do is undo it, right? And you can't. And having written this book and been through quite a few losses, still, when someone else loses someone, still struggle to write those cards and say the right thing and not resort to cliches. But I do think the one thing that I find, and this might not be true for everyone, is it's better to say something than nothing at all. Even if it's to say, I don't know what to say, but just to acknowledge you're going through a real shit time, and I'm not going to pretend it hasn't happened, because we had that happen a couple of times where people pretended like everything was fine, or like that this baby, and then it's like the baby hasn't existed. It's like she says, every day that they stay silent, you've made that baby smaller, or that person, you know, whether it's your mother you've lost or whoever. But it's really hard to know what to say, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it is. I guess that's why we write novels about it, rather than it's kind of ways of exploring things. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? You can be. We had a miscarriage there last year as well.
Oh,
that kind of. It's kind of like a black hole of kind of stuff that you get. Yeah, and you're not sure how, you know, how you should react and how you should react, how other people react, because you kind of have to have some empathy with their situation as well.
It's like going around in circles, isn't it? But I also think a miscarriage and a stillbirth is a really kind of hard loss to share with other people, because it's not the same as losing a parent or someone in your life who's an adult, because you've lost a past, but you've lost this future that you've never had. So it's really hard to get your head around of like, and it's, I think in my case, from the moment you're pregnant, you imagine that it's going to work out and that child's going to exist. So I think, like, you know, and my character compares a bit stillbirth with miscarriage. She's just like, she gets cross with someone who says miscarriage, but I'd hate to think that I could be quite that cold about it, because I think a loss of a baby and also an inability to get pregnant when you've planned a family is just hard at any stage, and it's that like mourning a future that you thought you were going to have.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
It's lost potential, which is kind of you're mourning what you didn't get or something. It's kind of like, it's
very
complicated, mentally difficult.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. And I just used to feel really sorry for Finn, our baby, that he just hadn't had a chance at life.
Yeah.
And someone said to me, which I did find quite close, like, but don't worry, he doesn't know any different. But I still felt like I just feel really cross for him. And when you see things like, I don't know, like, I remember my big one being at his first carol concert in reception. I was just like, and it was a really lovely moment. And I hate to do this to my big one because it shouldn't interfere with his life that he lost a sibling. But I remember sitting there thinking, like, Finn will never do this. And that kind of the future that didn't happen. I find quite hard.
What are we going to read next?
So we're going to move to Moomin Popper at Sea. So this is from the Moomin Popper, the Moomin Troll series, the Moomins, which, if you don't know, are a lovely family of creatures that live a quite bohemian lifestyle in Moomin Valley, where they take in lots of other creatures. So the main ones are Moomin Popper, Moomin Mama, and Moomin Troll, their son. And they live with a little girl called Little Mai, who's a really brilliant character. She's quite naughty and says what she thinks. This is quite late in the series, and it's basically what happens. The book explores Moomin Popper, who's head of the family, his existential crisis. Moomin Popper, he's a fixer. He's like a head of the family who likes to be in charge and help things, and this is the moment where he realises he's not really needed anymore, which I think happens to lots of parents at some point. It's kind of like even before the empty nest, when you realise your child doesn't need you to walk them to school, or they don't need you on weekends anymore, they can occupy themselves. So he has a bit of a crisis, and what he does is moves the entire family to a remote island to live in a lighthouse so that life is hard enough for him to be needed again. So it's quite an adult book, but written for children. And
like a lot of the best ones are. I mean,
Yeah.
like Roald Dahl and, you know.
Yeah, I think those are the ones that work for every age, aren't they? Same with
Yeah.
children's films. So this is like I'd say it's possibly the inciting incident in the book that really sets him off. "Papa," said Moomin Troll, "wake up! We've just put out a forest fire." Both Moomin Popper's paws were stuck firmly to the floor. He wrenched them loose with a strong feeling of reluctance. It wasn't fair. "What are you talking about?" he said. "A real little forest fire," Moomin Troll told him. "Just behind the tobacco patch. The moss was on fire, and Mama says that it might have been a spark from the chimney." Moomin Popper leaped into the air and in a flash became a determined man of action. His hat rolled down the steps. "We put it out," Moomin Troll shouted. "We put it out straight away. There's nothing for you to worry about." Moomin Popper stopped dead. He was feeling very angry. "Have you put it out without me?" he said. "Why didn't anybody tell me? Did you just let me go on sleeping without saying anything?" "But dearest," said Moomin Mama, leaning out of the kitchen window, "we didn't think it was really necessary to wake you up. It was a very small fire. It was only smoking a little. I happened to be going by with some buckets of water, so all I had to do was to sprinkle a few drops on it in passing." "In passing?" cried Moomin Popper. "Just sprinkle? Sprinkle indeed! What a word! And leaving the fire to burn under the moss unguarded! Where is it? Where is it?" Moomin Mama left what she was doing and led the way to the tobacco patch. Moomin Troll stayed on the veranda gazing after them. The black spot in the moss was a very small spot indeed. "Don't imagine," said Moomin Popper at last, very slowly, "that a spot like this isn't dangerous. Far from it. It can go on burning under the moss. You see, in the ground, hours and perhaps even days may go by, and then suddenly, woof! The fire breaks out somewhere quite different. Do you see what I mean?" "Yes, dearest," answered Moomin Mama. "So I'm going to stay here," said Moomin Popper, sulkily digging in the moss. "I shall stand guard over it. I'll stay here all night if necessary." "Do you really think?" Moomin Mama began. Then she just said, "Yes, that's very good of you. One never knows what will happen with moss." Moomin Popper sat all the afternoon watching the little black spot, first pulling up the moss for quite a way round it. He wouldn't leave it to go indoors for his dinner. He really wanted the others to think he was offended. "Do you think he'll stay out there all night?" asked Moomin Troll. "It's quite possible," said Moomin Mama. "If you're sore, observed Little Mai, peeling her potatoes with her teeth. "You have to be angry sometimes. Every little creep has a right to be angry, but Papa's angry in the wrong way. He's not letting it out, just shutting it up inside him. My dear child, said Moomin Mama, Papa knows what he's doing. I don't think he does, said little Mai simply. He doesn't know at all. Do you know? Not really, Moomin Mama had to admit. Moomin Papa dug his nose into the moss and was aware of the sour smell of smoke. The ground wasn't even warm anymore. He emptied his pipe into the hole and blew on the sparks. They glowed for a moment or two and then went out. He stamped on the fatal spot and then walked slowly down the garden to have a look in his crystal ball. Dusk was rising from the ground, as it usually did, gathering in under the trees. Round the crystal ball there was a little more light. There it stood, reflecting the whole garden, looking very beautiful on its coral pedestal. It was Moomin Papa's very own crystal ball, his own magic ball of shining blue glass, the centre of the garden, of the valley, and of the whole world. But Moomin Papa didn't look into it straight away. First he looked at his grimy paws, trying to collect all his vague, scattered and troubled thoughts. When he was feeling as sad as he possibly could, he looked into the crystal ball for consolation. Every evening of that long, warm, beautiful and melancholy summer, he had done the same thing. The crystal ball was always cool. Its blue was deeper and clearer than the blue of the sea itself, and it changed the colour of the whole world so that it became cool and remote and strange. At the centre of this glass world he saw himself, his own big nose, and around him he saw the reflection of a transformed, dreamlike landscape. The blue ground was deep, deep down inside, and there, where he couldn't reach, Moomin Papa began to search for his family. He only had to wait a while, and they always came. They were always reflected in the crystal ball. It was only natural, because they had so much to do at dusk. They were always doing something. Sooner or later, Moomin Mama would bustle over from the kitchen side of the house towards the outside cellar to fetch some sausages or some butter, or to the potato patch, or to get some wood. Every time she did it, she looked as though she was walking down a completely strange and exciting path. But you could never be sure. She might just as well be out on some secret errand of her own, which she thought was fun, or playing some private game, or just walking round for the sake of it. There she came, scampering along like a busy white ball, farthest among the bluest of blue shadows. And there was Moomin Troll, aloof and keeping himself to himself, and there was little Mai, slinking up the slope more like a movement than anything else. You could see so little of her. She was just a glimpse of something determined and independent, something so independent that it had no need to show itself. But their reflections made them all seem incredibly small, and the crystal ball made all their movements seem forlorn and aimless. Moomin Papa liked this. It was his evening game. It made him feel that they all needed protection, that they were at the bottom of a deep sea that only he knew about.
Interesting. Do you think parents, there is a kind of, initially, our lives change very rapidly when we have a child, and then we move into we recalibrate our lives around our children to a certain extent, and then when that kind of changes again, do you think that requires another type of recalibration where it's kind of, I haven't really gone through that phase myself yet, because my daughter's only 4, but I'm imagining with more kind of independence and volition, it's kind of feel harder and harder to kind of allow
I think
the
so.
independence with the control.
So ours are 12 and 8. So obviously they read on their own, and the big one goes places on his own, not very far, but he goes to school. But I feel like there's upsides to that, right? Because you can enjoy different films together, you enjoy different books together, you can go places, you can go to nice restaurants and things, and there's none of that having to constantly carry either the nappy bag or the colouring book and the spare clothes. There's none of that. But I think there is that kind of but you were my world, on a practical and emotional level for ages. Now you are on an emotional level, but on the practical level I'm not as needed, and there's some freedom in that. But I think and I love the way that book just kind of sums that up, and that fire scene, and that he's just what is my purpose if they don't all need me, and I've built my life around that role, and your role changes. And I suppose the way I don't know, it's strange to use a children's book as inspiration for something that's not for children, maybe, but it's that kind of that most novels explore. What is my purpose? Like, what is the point of any of it?
No, that's what I was just about to say. It's kind of like, it seems to me in a lot of these, there's a thread going through here of people trying to find meaning. Like, it's kind of, you feel like that's the biggest kind of motivator for human behavior, is kind of like, I need to find some purpose, I need to find some kind of like meaning in what I'm doing, or like,
I think so. And just like, who am I, and what's, like I say, and Rachel says this, my character is like, what's the point of me? Which I found was quite interesting, to explore the idea of someone on maternity leave without a baby. It's like quite an absurd concept, as she calls it, absurd.
What's the purpose of me? I mean, that's a very kind of like, I mean, that's one of those questions, isn't it? I was talking on another one of the podcasts about kind of like why we tell the kind of stories we tell, whether it's kind of like written into us, these stories, we tell these kind of stories because these are the kind of questions that we've been asking ourselves since we crawled out of the swamp. If you know what I mean. Do you think that's what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe in kind of like, you know, for planning, do you think to yourself, I'm going to tell a kind of, you know, journey and return type plot, or do you think it's important to
I think my next book is quite similar to this one in terms of my character. He thinks he's got it all worked out, and then it turns out he doesn't, and it's another person that saves him. I think that's like the difference between us and other animals, isn't it? Is that we've got each other, and maybe for me that's where our purpose comes from. It's the time we spend together, it's what we do for each other, it's how we make each other feel. And, you know, we're talking about family and Moom and Popper, like his purpose comes from being part of a family, you know, same for you and me probably, that, you know, and it's not all we are, but I think that's what it comes down to with my character. She becomes very close to a little girl in the book, and that kind of makes her realise, you know, yes, she's lost Luke, but that is undoable. And there are other people that you can connect with, and you know, she does have a husband, and it explores, like I say, how they deal with the loss together or don't deal with the loss together. But I suppose ultimately, for me, that's all there is. There's those moments of good time spent together and
shared experiences.
Yeah, and then the bigger picture of what we can do to help each other. You know.
Do you view your book, the book when it comes out, do you view it as kind of like a way of reaching out and kind of connecting with other people, or are you kind of thinking about your book it's going to go off and live its own life, or are you feeling like it's kind of a way of, you know, of people to empathize with something which maybe is normally kind of silenced or kind of hushed?
I didn't set out for it to be like people need to know about stillbirth. I think selfishly I set out of like, I know about this, and also it's a really weird concept, maternity leave without a baby. I'm coming back to that. That like, it's like, write about what you know. So I suppose it's a bit lazy. It didn't involve any research or hardly any at all.
I don't think it's lazy.
Like, I'm quite late because I think as a journalist I did tons of research, and I was like, no, this is going to be different. But it's more, I never set out for it to be like the book about stillbirth or anything like that. And and I don't want to kid myself that it'll have, you know, much reach. You just don't know with a book, do you? It's an incredibly crowded market. But having like announced that the book is coming out recently with a publisher, and having had people get in touch with me saying, like I think I mentioned earlier, thank God that there's now a book with stillbirth at its heart, I feel like it will be one of those ones. And you know, if anybody messages me on Twitter saying, oh my God, someone said to this to me after my miscarriage or after my baby died, I always write back, because you don't want to say that into silence, and I don't see that as like an onus at all. I don't like Twitter for the angry side of it, and I don't like the way I use it to waste time when I should be writing. It's really naughty.
Disappear.
I'm like a naughty child who's not getting on their wet. But if it's for that, like, totally all for it. And I think now I'm realising it might be that that's the way this book is. That's not all that happens in the book. It's like, stillbirth's at its heart, but there's the relationship with the little girl. There's why did that man try to kill himself, which we get to.
There's also a lot of humour, right?
So, but it's, ultimately it is about stillbirth, and I think people will want to use it to talk about stillbirth, and I think, great, you know, like, let's get it out there, because like I say, that silence is like, just compounds your pain.
Yeah. What are you going to read next?
What am I going to read next? Do you want the last bit from my book?
Yeah.
So this bit, so as I said, there's a relationship in the book between Rachel and a little girl called Josephine, who is 7. So she turns 7 during the book. She has a birthday. Josephine is the daughter of someone called Lola, who Rachel meets at Oval Tube Station. So she goes back to Oval Tube Station determined to find this man that she saved from jumping in front of a train, or that's what she thinks at that point. And she manages to get this tube worker, talks her into, who's got her own reasons for helping Rachel, into helping her find the records from that day. And by they get to know each other, and she ends up looking after the little girl after school and things, doing the school run. And so we meet them. This is a little bit of a way in where they've become quite close, and they've decided, as one of their after school activities, Rachel and Josephine, to build a town out of cardboard. And the thing that's important to know before I read this is they are both totally obsessed with palindromes. So there's a few palindromes which might not work in this. You might want to have a pen or write them down, or I'll just hold them up. There's a few palindromes which I think will work better on the page for when people have the book. But let's give it a go. Right. To LRS 17, Saturday, the 22nd of April, 10:35 a.m. Subject: town planning. Solopolis, or London Nodnol, if Josephine prevails, is magnificent, or it will be when it's built. We spent most of the evening planning on sheets of A3, but managed to make a school out of a shoebox, orthopaedic, my mother's, 2 toilet rolls and a Toblerone box. Purchased especially, I ate it alone, realising almost too late about the nuts. I suggested we start with the most essential buildings, and unprompted, Josephine picked a school. We called it Luke's School, spelled Lookskool. You can see why. Among the supplies I bought in was a pack of 24 Sharpies, lots of colours. When Josephine saw them, she hugged me. "You're a BEBFF," she said. BEBFF? Best ever BFF, she says, stabbing at the plastic pack with kitchen scissors. I prize away the scissors. Friday night is peak time in A&E departments, I tell her. It's actually not. Monday daytime is worst. I just checked. I'll let her know next time. Here you go. I hand her the open pack. BEBFF. Best ever bright felt tips furniture. She presses her lips together, grins, shakes her head. She wants me to guess again. Big fat ferret? Fish? Farmer? Burpee fish farmer. Her eyes are watering and she's squeezing her lips tighter and tighter together. She bounces from side to side, crosses her legs. Go to the loo before you have a big fat fail, I say. She leaves the door open, makes a long ah sound. Shouts, big female friend. That's not a thing, I shout back. Kayla told me. She flushes, reappears. Go back and wash your hands, you big fat germ spreader. That doesn't work because it's not. Go and wash your hands. We have a whole city to build. And colour in, she calls from the bathroom. Use soap. To colour in, she shouts back. I don't know if she's quick-witted or very literal. Josephine made the sign for your school while I assembled the building. She wanted to colour the letters rainbow order and then rainbow order back the other way. I told her how to remember the order with what they call a mnemonic. It goes, Richard of York gave battle in vain, meaning red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That prompted new questions, and I had to concede I knew neither about Richard nor his battles. We invented an alternative. Rachel of Yellowtown goes blue in vacuums. Josephine wrote it out and drew a picture of a blue me with yellow hair inside a giant hoover. Solopolis is already a case study in how construction products fall behind schedule. We're building it in your room. As Josephine coloured in, she asked about you. I told her about how we drank orange juice and ate mangoes, your favourite music, how you were tall, looked like a fast runner. I showed her your picture. He's sleeping, she says. Did he want to come out? He was ready. There was lots he wanted to do. He would have loved to play with you, I said. He can't have Sharpies, she says. Maya's baby Sharpied all over their sofa and Maya's school shirt, and her mum put her Sharpies in the bin. Mummy says it's Maya's mummy's fault for having Sharpies and a baby. She puts her hands on her hips, does her Lola accent. That woman, still a child. Not everything is someone's fault, I say. The baby took them out of the bin and sucked on them, and his lips went green forever. That wouldn't happen, I say. It's too hard to explain. She says that a lot, to me at least. I've told E I'm having a friend's daughter after school some nights, that it gives me something to do. I was ready with more. How the bereavement midwife suggested it. How it would make me eat properly, that it was fun. But he didn't ask. Said he'd be back and forth to New York for the next couple of months anyway. What's her name? He said later. The little girl you've got. She's the one with the birthday cake. Wow, yes, Josephine, or Jojo for short. She loves dogs and palindromes. She's brilliant, she's funny, but polite and so clever. I met her mum through the baby loss group. She's called Lola. I did find Lola because of you. So Rachel lies a bit sometimes, as you might have just worked out. She didn't meet Lola at a baby loss group.
Oh, amazing. I think we're going to have to leave it there, Katie. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk and have a chat. Good luck with the book when it comes out. I'm going to order it on Amazon directly after this. Available on pre-order right now, right?
Yeah, it is.
Good, and it's out in April.
April is an ebook and book in June.
Fantastic. So I'm sure we'll be seeing you around. And you're going to be reading on Friday at VD 26. So that'll be...
I am. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no. Fantastic to have you. It's going to be a good bill. Got some good people on the thing.
Brilliant.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks.